Hello friends, this is my true story, so watch till end. My name is Michael Harris, and for a long time, my life was divided into two parts. Everything that happened before Tuesday morning, and everything that came after. 10 years ago, on a Tuesday that looked exactly like every other Tuesday we had ever lived through, my wife walked out of our house and disappeared from the world. Not in a dramatic way, not with a scream or a final argument, or a slammed door. She left quietly, so quietly that it took me years to understand that silence itself can be violent. That morning began like 1,000 mornings before it. The alarm went off at 6:15 a.m., the same dull electronic chime that had been waking us up for decades. Jennifer rolled over first, groaning softly, her hand automatically reaching for the clock to shut it off. I watched her for a moment, the way you do when you've been married so long that observation becomes habit rather than admiration. She looked tired, but not unhappy. Just normal. Normal was the most dangerous thing about that morning. We shuffled into the kitchen together, still half asleep, our feet moving through familiar paths worn into the floor by years of routine. Coffee brewed. Steam curled into the air. Morning light filtered in through the window above the sink, painting everything in that soft, pale gold that makes ordinary life feel safe. We talked about groceries, about Emma needing new shoes for school, about how we might visit Jennifer's mother that weekend, if the weather held. Useless conversations, weightless words, the kind you never think to memorize because you assume there will be millions more. Jennifer was 42 then. We had been married for 22 years, long enough that love didn't announce itself loudly anymore. It lived in small things. Shared glances, automatic kindness, the comfort of knowing where the other person would be standing in a room without looking. Our daughter, Emma, was 7 years old. She was still asleep upstairs, her school backpack waiting by the door where Jennifer had placed it the night before. Jennifer always packed Emma's things, always made sure everything was ready. She cared about details. That's why what happened later destroyed me so completely. Jennifer worked as an accountant downtown. 15 years of the same firm. Reliable, precise, trusted. The kind of person who never forgot a deadline and never showed up late. People depended on her. I depended on her. She dressed that morning the way she always did. Neutral colors, practical shoes, her hair pulled back neatly. She packed her lunch, slid into her work bag, and checked her phone before placing it beside her purse. Nothing fell off. Nothing warned me. Before she left, she stepped close to me near the coffee maker and kissed me. A quick kiss. Automatic. Familiar. The kind of goodbye that feels permanent only in hindsight. Love you, she said. See you tonight. She said it casually, because when you believe in forever, you don't feel the need to emphasize it. I watched her walk to the car through the kitchen window. She backed out of the driveway, paused, and waved. I lifted my hand and waved back. That image, the silver Honda pulling away, her hand raised briefly in farewell, burned itself into my mind. It became the last photograph my memory ever took of my wife. Jennifer never came home. At first, it didn't feel real. When her office called around 10, that morning asking if she was sick, I laughed softly and said no. I told them I'd seen her leave just fine. When my calls went to voicemail, I told myself her phone battery must be dead. By noon, the unease crept in, quiet, subtle, like a shadow stretching across the floor. Jennifer always answered her phone. Always. I called her best friend. Her mother. No one had heard from her. By 2 o'clock, fear stopped whispering and started shouting. I called the police. They told me I had to wait 24 hours, that adults sometimes disappear briefly, that maybe she needed space, that she would likely come home. I spent that night sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the door, listening to every sound outside, jumping at headlights passing through the window. I slept maybe 20 minutes. Every noise felt like it might be her keys. Morning came. Jennifer still wasn't home. That's when the world shifted into something colder. The missing person report triggered something official, something heavy. The police took it seriously once they understood who she was. A responsible woman with no history of disappearing, No financial problems, no warning signs. 2 days later, they found her car. A rest stop, 40 miles from our house. Parked neatly, as if she had simply stepped away for a moment. Her purse was on the passenger seat, her wallet inside it, her phone, everything she needed to exist in the world, left behind. But not her. They searched everywhere. Woods, water, cameras, witnesses. Dogs traced her scent until it dissolved into nothing. No struggle, no blood, no answers, just absence. For months, the investigation moved with urgency, then with effort, then with obligation. Each phone call from the police brought hope that collapsed as soon as the words left their mouths. After a year, the silence became familiar. After 3, it became expected. After 7, the court declared her dead. 7 years. That's how long the law waits before giving up on hope. But I never did. I couldn't. How do you bury someone when there's no body? How do you mourn when there's no ending? I stayed in our house because leaving felt like betrayal. I kept her clothes because touching them was the only way I could remember her warmth. Every Sunday, I went to the cemetery. There was a headstone, her name, dates that felt like lies carved in stone. I talked to her there, told her about Emma, about school projects, about birthdays she missed. Emma grew up asking questions I couldn't answer. Where was Mommy? Why didn't she come back? Did she forget us? And every time, my heart broke in a new way. I lived 10 years inside that question. Where did you go? I didn't know then that the answer would destroy everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and the kind of cruelty that hides behind a smiling face. I believed my wife was dead. I was wrong. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through cracked walls, filling spaces you didn't even know existed until you're drowning in them. After the police stopped calling regularly, after friends stopped asking if there was any news, after the world quietly accepted that Jennifer was gone, my life settled into something that looked stable from the outside and felt hollow from within. I went to work. I paid bills. I smiled when people expected me to. But inside, everything was suspended in the moment she drove away. The house became a museum of a life that no longer moved forward. Jennifer's side of the closet stayed untouched. Her sweaters hung exactly where she had left them, sleeves still carrying the faint curve of her arms. Her shoes lined the floor like she might step back into them at any moment. I couldn't bring myself to pack anything away. Doing that felt like admitting she wasn't coming back, and I refused to accept that lie. At night, when the house was quiet, I would stand in the closet holding her close to my face, breathing in what little scent remained. I was terrified of forgetting how she smelled, terrified that time would steal even that from me. Photos covered every wall. Wedding photos, vacation photos, pictures of Jennifer holding Emma as a baby, smiling with a joy so real it hurt to look at. I surrounded myself with her face because I was afraid that if I stopped seeing it every day, it would fade. And if her face faded, then she would truly be gone. Every Sunday morning, I visited the cemetery. There was no body beneath that ground, just a marker, a compromise between hope and resignation. Born 1968. Disappeared 2015. Beloved wife and mother. I hated that word, disappeared. It wasn't death. It wasn't life. It was a question carved into stone. I would sit on the grass beside the grave and talk to her like she could hear me. I told her about Emma's spelling tests, about her favorite colors changing every few months, about how she still slept with the stuffed rabbit Jennifer had given her when she was 3. People began to recognize me there. Other mourners, groundskeepers. I became part of the landscape, the man with the empty grave. I'm sure some of them thought I was tragic. Others probably thought I was refusing to move on. They were all right. Emma suffered the most. She was 7 when Jennifer vanished, old enough to remember her voice, young enough to lose it over time. At first, she believed her mother would come back. She drew pictures for her, saved school projects, asked me every night if Mommy might come home tomorrow. I told her yes, not because I believed it, but because I didn't know how to crush that hope without crushing her too. As she grew older, hope turned into confusion. Confusion turned into pain. Pain turned into questions I had no answers for. Why didn't she come back, Dad? Did something bad happen to her? Did she forget about me? Those questions carved deep lines into my soul. I watched my daughter learn how to live with uncertainty, how to brace herself for loss before it even happened. She developed anxiety, trust issues, a constant fear that the people she loved would vanish without warning. Grief counselors called it ambiguous loss. They said it was one of the hardest forms of trauma to heal from because there was no closure, no ritual that marked an ending, just endless waiting. I blamed myself. If I had driven her to work that day, if I had noticed something was wrong, if I had been a better husband, the guilt lived with me, slept beside me, whispered to me in the dark. I replayed that morning a million times, dissecting every word, every glance, searching for a sign I must have missed. Years passed. Emma grew into a teenager. Jennifer stayed frozen at 42 in my mind. I didn't date. I didn't move. I didn't allow myself happiness because happiness felt like betrayal. What if she came back? What if she needed me? I had to be there. I lived like a man guarding a door that never opened. By the time 10 years passed, grief wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, heavy, constant. Like wearing a coat you couldn't take off no matter the season. Last Saturday, I left town for a work conference. 3 days away from the house felt strange, like abandoning a post I'd been guarding for a decade. But when the conference ended, I didn't rush home. There was nothing waiting for me there except silence. I stayed an extra night. On Saturday morning, I drove aimlessly through a small town I had never visited before. Quiet streets, old buildings, a place untouched by my past. I told myself I was just killing time. Then I saw the church. The doors were open, flowers everywhere, music drifting into the street. A wedding. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe something inside me wanted to remember what love looked like before it turned into loss. Maybe grief pulled me toward joy the way cold pulls you toward warmth. I walked inside, and everything I believed about my life was about to collapse. Because as the organ played, as the guests stood, as the bride began walking down the aisle, I felt something I hadn't felt in 10 years. Recognition and terror, and the sickening realization that the grave I had been visiting every Sunday might never have been empty by accident. If Jennifer wasn't dead, then where had she been all this time? And what did that make the last 10 years of my life? The organ began to play, and the sound filled the church like a slow, rising tide. Everyone stood. So did I. Not because I wanted to. My legs were already weak, but because I didn't want to be the only man seated when the bride appeared. I didn't want attention. I didn't want to exist at all in that moment. I just wanted to disappear into the back row of pews and be invisible. The church was beautiful in an old, solemn way. High ceilings arched overhead, wooden beams darkened by age. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, scattering fragments of red and blue across the floor like broken memories. The air smelled of flowers, white roses and lilies, thick and sweet, almost suffocating. This was a place built for promises. I stood there, hands resting lightly on the back of the pew in front of me, my mind drifting to a different church, a different lifetime. Jennifer walking toward me decades ago. Her smile, her nervous laugh, the way my hands had shaken when I first saw her in that white dress. I swallowed hard. This wasn't my life anymore. The bride appeared at the back of the church, framed by the open doors and the bright daylight beyond. At first, she was only a silhouette beneath the veil, glowing softly in the contrast between shadow and sun. The music swelled. She took her first step forward. The guests leaned slightly, smiling, turning their heads to follow her progress down the aisle. Cameras lifted. Hands dabbed at eyes. Joy passed from pew to pew like a shared breath. I watched without thinking. The bride moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured and graceful. Her posture was confident, calm. This wasn't a young woman nervous about the unknown. This was someone who had lived, who knew herself. She was closer now, still several rows away, but something in my chest tightened. A strange pressure, an unease I couldn't name. I told myself it was memory. Weddings do that. They stir ghosts. They make you see the past in strangers. I told myself grief was playing tricks on me. But the feeling didn't go away. As she walked, I noticed the way she held her bouquet, the angle of her wrists, the gentle tilt of her head, almost imperceptible, as if she were listening for something only she could hear. My heart began to pound. I'd seen that movement before, thousands of times. I shook my head slightly, as if I could clear the thought from my mind. Stop, I told myself. You're imagining things. She passed another pew, then another. Each step brought her closer, and with every step, the sense of familiarity grew sharper, more insistent. My skin prickled. My hands tightened against the wood. It wasn't just her appearance. It was her presence. The way she occupied space. The way she moved through it. That wasn't something a photograph could explain. That was something you only knew after sharing decades of life with someone. She was 3 pews away now. The groom stood at the altar, smiling, eyes wet with tears. He looked like a man who believed he was standing at the beginning of the happiest chapter of his life. I almost pitied him. As the bride reached the pew in front of me, she turned her head slightly to the left. It was a small, unconscious movement, nothing dramatic. Just a glance. That was all it took. The world stopped. The music didn't disappear, but it might as well have. Sound faded into a distant hum. My vision narrowed, the edges blurring, as if everything outside that single profile no longer mattered. I knew that face. The curve of her nose, the line of her jaw, the shape of her ear. Even beneath the veil, even softened by age, it was unmistakable. My wife, Jennifer. The air left my lungs in a rush, but no new breath came in. My chest seized. I grabbed the pew in front of me to stay upright, as dizziness swept through me like a wave. This wasn't recognition. This was collision. 10 years of grief slammed headfirst into reality. No. My brain rejected what my eyes were seeing. This couldn't be happening. Jennifer was dead. The law said so. The grave said so. 10 years of mourning said so. Dead people don't walk down aisles. Dead people don't age. Dead people don't smile behind wedding veils. I felt heat rush to my face, then cold. My hands shook violently. My knees threatened to buckle. Somewhere inside me, something broke open with a soundless scream. The bride continued walking. She didn't see me. She didn't look back again. She passed me as if I were nothing more than another stranger in the crowd. Close enough that I could have reached out and touched her arm. Close enough to smell her perfume, a scent I recognized even after a decade. I wanted to shout her name. I wanted to grab her and demand answers. I wanted the entire church to stop and look and see what I was seeing. But my body wouldn't obey. Shock pinned me in place, heavy and absolute. I was trapped inside myself, watching my life unravel without the ability to intervene. She reached the altar. The man giving her away placed her hand into the groom's. The gesture felt obscene, like handing over something that was never his to begin with. Everyone sat. I sat too, collapsing onto the pew as if my strings had been cut. The officiant began to speak. Words about love, commitment, faith, sacred bonds. They floated past me, hollow and cruel. All I could see was the back of Jennifer's head, the slope of her shoulders, the way she shifted her weight slightly from one foot to the other, an old habit I knew intimately. This isn't real, my mind insisted. You're hallucinating. I had read about grief-induced psychosis, about the brain creating comfort when pain becomes unbearable. Maybe this was that. Maybe my mind had finally fractured under the weight of 10 years without answers. I needed proof. My hands fumbled for my phone, fingers clumsy and numb. I kept it low, hidden near my lap, as I opened the camera and zoomed in. The image on the screen wobbled, but it was clear enough. Her face. I took one photo, then another, and another. I flipped to my gallery and scrolled back, past years of images until I found Jennifer smiling at the camera, younger, alive in a way I thought was lost forever. I compared. Nose. Same. Eyes. Same shape, same tilt. Mouth. Same curve. Then the ears. Jennifer's ears had always been distinctive, attached lobes, a unique contour I'd teased her about lovingly for years. I zoomed in on the bride's ear as she turned slightly during the ceremony. Identical. My heart hammered so hard I thought I might pass out. Then I saw it. Above her left eyebrow, faint but undeniable, was the scar. The childhood scar. The one she'd gotten falling off her bike when she was 8. The one she'd shown me on our 3rd date, laughing about how brave she'd been. That scar had followed her through life, and now it stood in front of me, mocking everything I believed. This wasn't resemblance. This was identity. Jennifer was alive, and she was marrying another man. The groom spoke his vows, voice thick with emotion. He talked about destiny, about finding love later in life, about believing in second chances. I felt sick. Jennifer spoke next. Her voice hit me harder than her face had. That voice lived in my bones, in my memories, in the quiet moments when the house was too silent, and I'd swear I could hear her calling my name. It hadn't changed. She promised to love him, to stand by him, to share her life. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. She had made those promises before. To me. They exchanged rings. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. The veil lifted. She kissed him, and there was no denying it anymore. Jennifer smiled, radiant, joyful, completely unburdened. The church erupted in applause. Everyone stood again as the newly married couple turned and began walking back down the aisle. Toward me. I stayed seated this time. I couldn't trust my legs. They passed within feet of me. Jennifer's laughter rang out, light and carefree. She didn't look in my direction. Her eyes were fixed on her future, not the man whose past she had destroyed. She walked out of the church into sunlight. And just like that, the woman I had buried 10 years ago walked back into the world, without me. I remained in that pew long after the church emptied. Alone, surrounded by flowers meant for a celebration I had just watched become a funeral for my sanity. Because now there was only one question left. If my wife hadn't died, then everything I had lived for 10 years had been built on a lie. And lies, once exposed, demand consequences. I stayed seated long after the church emptied, long after the last echo of music faded into silence. The pew beneath me felt cold and unforgiving. My hands rested uselessly in my lap, fingers still trembling, as if my body hadn't yet received permission to exist in the new reality it had been dragged into. Jennifer was alive, not injured, not lost, not confused, alive and married. That truth pressed down on my chest until breathing felt like work. 10 years of grief didn't unravel neatly. They didn't politely step aside to make room for understanding. They collided violently with the present, leaving wreckage everywhere. I finally stood, my legs unsteady, and walked out of the church like a man learning how to use his body again. Outside, the celebration was in full bloom. Guests laughed. Cameras flashed. Someone popped champagne. Jennifer stood on the steps, glowing, hugging people who loved a version of her that didn't include me or Emma. I stayed back, hidden among strangers, watching my wife live a life she had stolen from us. I knew then I couldn't confront her. Not here. Not like this. If I walked toward her, I would either collapse or explode, and neither would give me answers. What I needed wasn't emotion. It was truth. I got into my car and drove straight to the local police station, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Every stoplight felt unreal. Every passerby felt like a witness to a secret too large to hold. At the station, the words came out broken and unbelievable. A young officer looked at me the way people look at men who have lost something vital. Carefully, skeptically, with concern wrapped around doubt. They brought in a detective. His name was Morrison. I told him everything. About Jennifer's disappearance. The car. The rest stop. The decade of grief. The wedding. I showed him the photos. He didn't interrupt. He didn't dismiss me. He studied the images slowly, zooming in, comparing. I watched his expression change. Not dramatically, but subtly. The way professionals react when reality starts bending against their expectations. Facial recognition confirmed it. A 98.7% match. Jennifer Mitchell was alive. Her new name was Rebecca Morrison, and she had been living freely, openly, for 9 years. What came next shattered whatever fragile hope I had left that there might be some explanation that softened the blow. There wasn't. Jennifer hadn't been abducted. She hadn't lost her memory. She hadn't been in danger. She had planned her disappearance. For months. She abandoned her car on purpose, left her purse and phone behind to create panic. She paid criminals for a false identity, complete with documents, history, and legitimacy. She hid for a year while the police searched rivers and woods for her body. Then she stepped into a new life. A nurse, a respected co-worker, a friend, a fiancé, a bride. While Emma cried herself to sleep, while I spoke to a gravestone, while 10 years of my life evaporated into mourning. The police called it fraud, identity theft, filing false reports, crimes that carried real prison time. I called it theft of something far more valuable. Time, truth, family. 3 days after her wedding, they arrested her. I waited at the station, hollowed out by exhaustion and fury, as officers brought her in. She looked nothing like the woman in white. No smile, no confidence, just fear and collapse. Through one-way glass, I watched her sit with her lawyer, her shoulders caved inward, hands cuffed, eyes fixed on the table. When Detective Morrison asked her real name, she whispered it. Jennifer Mitchell. Hearing it broke something in me. That name had lived in my mouth for decades. I had spoken it with love, with longing, with grief. Now it sounded foreign, tainted. When they asked her why she did it, I leaned forward, desperate. Her answer was small, ugly, cowardly. She said she felt trapped. That motherhood suffocated her. That she didn't want that life anymore. Not our life. She didn't want Emma. She didn't want me. She didn't even have the courage to leave honestly. So she chose disappearance. She said she thought we'd be better off. She said she was sorry. Her apology meant nothing. Sorry doesn't give a child back her childhood. Sorry doesn't return a decade stolen by lies. Sorry doesn't resurrect trust. She asked if I was there. When she turned toward the glass and said my name, crying, something inside me went silent. I didn't feel love. I didn't feel hate. I felt emptiness. Jennifer now faces years in prison. Her new husband filed for annulment immediately. Their marriage never legally existed, built on fraud, deception, and stolen identity. David was a victim too, another casualty of her escape. Emma wants nothing to do with her. When I told my daughter the truth, that her mother was alive, she didn't cry. She got angry. She said the woman who abandoned her didn't deserve to be called mom. She tore up every letter Jennifer sent from jail without reading them. And she was right. Jennifer chose herself over her child, over honesty, over love. I am 52 now, standing in the ruins of a life I thought I understood. People ask me if I'm relieved she's alive. The truth is harder than that. I'm relieved she wasn't murdered, but I am devastated to know she chose to disappear. My wife wasn't dead. She was just too much of a coward to say goodbye. And that truth, more than any grave, will haunt me for the rest of my life.